In this video, I show you how to use Airtable's newest feature, Prefill Hidden Form Fields.
No code is the best in the whole wide world. No code, oh yeah, yeah.
So this is a really powerful feature that has been requested and definitely hotly anticipated amongst the Airtable community for the last few years. And finally, it's here today. I've played around with it. It's great. It's really powerful. And I think you'll be able to build out some really good use cases in your own Airtable workflows with this. So this is our base that we'll use for today's tutorial. The first table is the table called clients. It holds all of our client details and information. And then the second table is the data table. What we collect in this table is monthly data from each of our clients by way of an Airtable form that is sent out to them by an automated monthly email. In this example, we've got 5 fields in our form, and we want to set the value in the source field and in the form client record ID so that the user can't change that value and that it's preset in advance. Before the feature that was released today, we could pre-fill fields, but importantly, we couldn't hide pre-filled fields. And instead of hiding it from the form, you'd have to put in a note something like this: do not update this field. And I would have to do the same thing on this field down here. And effectively this would go to the user and they would see 5 fields on the form and they'd be asked not to update this one and not to update this one, and it's not very aesthetically pleasing. It looks a little bit complicated to your end users, and then they might also just not read your message here, and they might feel that they need to change it for whatever reason, or they might actually just get a little bit overwhelmed and not want to complete the rest of your form, and they might just end up ringing you or emailing you or texting you. And I suppose the whole purpose of using the form in the first place was really to create a more streamlined flow of information. For people that are new to Airtable, every single form that you create inside of an Airtable base has its own unique URL, and anybody with that URL is able to access your form. And if they have access to your form, they can now create records in the table that the form is created on. And in this scenario, I have an automation set up that sends out this link in an email to each of these clients on a monthly basis, prompting them to submit their revenue and cost of goods sold information for that specific month. In order to achieve the pre-fill form functionality, what you do is you take that unique form URL. That's the beginning of my formula. I've basically opened apostrophe and dropped in my unique form field here. And what happens next is a concatenate formula that basically allows me to pre-fill the source field equals, and I want that always to be client, because I want this source to always be client when it's come from a client submitted form. And then if I'm manually creating a record in here, I will select the source myself as internal. And so that's the idea of this single select field, is to keep track of the source of the data. Where did it come from? And then the second aspect to the formula is effectively looking to pre-fill the form client record ID, which is this field over here. And I want the client record ID associated with the client to be submitted with each form submission that client makes, so that I know when I'm looking at my Airtable base which client submitted which form submission and which record in this table relates to which client. And I want to attach onto that specific prefill parameter, I want to actually take the record ID of the user. The record ID is basically a unique code that every single record or row inside of Airtable has. You'll see here, they look like this, and every single row, regardless of what table you're in, has a unique record ID behind it. In order to expose the record ID, what I usually do is use a formula field, and I put in record ID formula here, and once you hit save on that, it will show you the record ID for every single record that is created in this table. And it's actually, you'll see it in here in the URL that's going to be sent to our user. Let me just show you what that looks like. Okay, we'll remove that part and hit save. And if I click that now for Bill Gates, it's going to bring me to the form. And as you can see now, it's pre-filled for client, and it's got this pre-filled ID. And as I said earlier, what I would have had as a description in here prior to today's future release is, please do not edit this field. And there's always the risk that they will edit that field, and then that will break my next automation that I'm about to show you. So today what you can do is you can now add another parameter onto the end of your formula. And to add another parameter, this is the formula as it works. And what I'm doing is I'm hiding 2 fields from the form. So the way to do it is and hide underscore the name of the field here and equals true. And then I'm doing it again for and hide underscore and the name of the field here ID equals true. And so I'm using this ampersand here after the record ID and open apostrophe to basically allow me to concatenate that onto the end of the URL. And so when I have that done, now you have this entirely configured URL that is unique to each of the users. And now when I click on that and open this up, you'll see that I'm only presented with 3 fields. And if we go back and do the same thing for Tim Cook here, and we've got 3 fields. And so it's March time. Tim Cook is entering his results for March and he's made €200,000 of revenue. And he spent out 125,000 on direct purchases. And he's going to hit submit on that. And if I come back to my base now and jump into the data, you can see here an automation running, and the automation has basically created a linked record field. So it has linked this record to Tim as a client in here. And you can see here is the linked record inside of his client record in the client table. The key to getting this working is I've got an automation in here, and you can see automation to update form entered data. And the trigger I'm using is when a form is submitted, and the data is the table and it's the monthly results form. And then it's simply update a record. And what it's doing is it's taking the record ID from step 1, i.e. being the record ID of the form submission that has just been created on the data table. And it is now updating the linked record field with the form client record ID field that has been passed through a hidden form field into this field over here. And it's putting it into your linked record field. And in that way, it's linking it to your client's table. You might say to me, well, why don't you just let the client select themselves from a linked record field inside of the form? Well, you're probably not going to want to do that, because if you have a linked record field inside of a form, let me just show you what happens. The client comes along, and when they click this add button to find themselves, they're going to see all of the other data relating to all of your other clients. So you're certainly not going to want that as an option in cases where there's sensitive data or personal data and anything that you're not necessarily looking for your users to have access to just because they have access to your form. So that's just one use case of how to use this really powerful feature. I'm sure there's a lot of use cases out there, and I'd love to hear what your use case might be or what problem this solves for you, and you might leave a comment on that below. I'm going to embed a copy of this Airtable base in the nocode.ie community. You can actually make a copy of this base and bring it into your own workspace, and you can play around with the formulas that I've got in here, and you can play around with all of the fields and see exactly how I've done it. You can do it in your own time and see exactly how to configure this form URL here. So look, if you got any value from today's video, I'd really love you to subscribe to the channel. It really motivates me to keep going and creating content like this. You might also please like the video, and if there's anything else that you'd like to see me cover in the future, please leave a comment below and I'll be sure to factor it in. So as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed today's tutorial, I really think you'll enjoy this tutorial here, so go and check that out. And as always, thanks for watching and thanks for staying to the end.